Do you remember a time when Halloween meant cheap plastic masks and real pumpkins carved with old spoons? The 1960s and 1970s were the eras when Halloween was rustic, fun, and spooky in the simplest way possible. Today, we will explore 25 Halloween traditions that were once popular across America but have now completely vanished from modern celebrations. Paper and cardboard decorations. Halloween decorations in the 60s and 70s carried an unmistakable tradition. They were very simple, made primarily from paper or cardboard. This was a generic but familiar look popular throughout American neighborhoods. The Bristol Company was famous for producing thin, die-cut paper decorations, black cats, witches, and pumpkins, often sold at 5 and dimes for mere cents, about $15 to $20 today. Children also strung popcorn or used dry leaves and colored paper to create garlands hung along railings and hallways. These paper cutouts were often printed on both sides and could fold out 3D, adding a bit of depth to the space. But they were easily torn, flammable, and faded, failing to meet modern standards for durability and safety. Until vinyl, LED lights, and more durable models appeared, traditional paper decorations gradually fell out of favor and disappeared entirely. The faint yellow light from house lamps shining through the thin paper taped to the windows, casting eerie, flickering silhouettes, was an unmistakable sign that Halloween had arrived on the street. The jack-o'-lantern pumpkin. In the 60s to 70s, almost every porch had a pumpkin that was much more rustic and genuine than today. Real pumpkins were bought at local farm stands for cents, equivalent to a few dollars now. They were then carved into spooky, distorted faces using dull knives or old spoons, following one's imagination. Or sometimes, they simply wrote their names on it. Wax candles or small tapers were carefully placed inside. The shimmering orange-yellow light flickering through the skin created bobbing shadows on the porch wall, still an unforgettable feature of the American autumn then. Furthermore, the pumpkin seeds scooped out weren't thrown away but cleaned, salted, and roasted in the oven for a traditional snack available only once a year. Many children competed to see whose pumpkin was the scariest or which family had the most meticulous carving. Some areas even held carving contests at schools or churches to encourage creativity. However, starting in the late 1970s, thousands of small fires caused by real candles, wax dripping onto dry leaves, or the risk of fire spread led many cities and families to switch to safer flashlights, electric lights, or LEDs. Stores also started selling pre-decorated plastic or foam pumpkins instead of the traditional ones. Ben Cooper plastic masks. If you grew up in the 60s and 70s, you definitely remember those flimsy Ben Cooper plastic mask boxes bought at Woolworths or Kmart. Every time you opened one, the unforgettable, pungent, distinct plastic smell wafted out. A typical traditional Ben Cooper costume consisted of a hard plastic mask with a thin elastic strap and a vinyl tunic printed with a pop culture character like Batman, the Mummy, or Ghost. Although they were very cheap, only about $2 to $3 then, nearly $15 to $20 now, making it the most popular choice for every child wanting to transform into their favorite character. But wearing these masks often made children uncomfortable. The tight elastic strap hurt the back of the neck, the eye holes never aligned, severely restricting visibility, and breath fogged the plastic. Many children even had to lie to their parents that they could still see and breathe, fearing their mother would cut the mask wider, ruining the character's shape. However, in the late 1970s, this traditional type of costume was heavily criticized for safety issues, especially the flammable material and the face covering that caused difficulty breathing, posing a potential danger when children moved around at night. Homemade costumes. Back then, Halloween didn't have Amazon or Party Cities selling ready-made outfits. Every costume bore a personal stamp and was unlike anyone else's. Traditional costumes were crafted from readily available household items such as fabric scraps, aluminum foil, cardboard boxes, or a simple white bedsheet for a ghost costume. Do you remember Mom cutting up an old sheet to make a ghost shirt? Or Dad using a large cardboard box for a robot body while the children and siblings glued glitter and cellophane, giggling in the dimly lit living room? The cost for each outfit was almost zero, but the effort and time put in were substantial, often taking 1 to 2 days to prepare. Many elementary schools even encouraged students to wear homemade costumes during school festivals to celebrate creativity. However, the emergence of professional costume stores with cheaper, more convenient ready-made outfits in the 1980s, along with parents becoming busier, replaced this tradition that required so much effort and crafting skill, leading to the gradual disappearance of homemade costumes. Trick-or-treating. In the 1960s to 70s, trick-or-treat was a tradition every American child eagerly awaited all year. When the sun set, American suburban streets glowed with yellow lights. Kids wearing Ben Cooper masks, holding an old pillowcase or paper bag, began the magical journey of Halloween night. There were no phones, no tight supervision, only trust, neighborly spirit, and laughter echoing down the streets. Houses with lights on were the signal that there's candy here, and children would knock, chanting in unison, "Trick or treat?" Trick was the choice between a mischievous prank and treat symbolized by a sweet gift. Adults handed out candy along with compliments or a homemade caramel apple. Children organized themselves into groups, planned their route, and wandered around their neighborhood for hours on end, until the last porch light turned off as if to say, "This house is out of candy." There were no time limits, no security worries. Trick-or-treating back then was a symbol of freedom, trust, and community. Later, in the 80s, due to the doubled risk of children being hit by cars at night and other security issues, this tradition changed. Classic trick-or-treating gradually transformed. Today, children still dress up and go trick-or-treating, but few are allowed to wander all night. With urbanization and increased security concerns, most neighborhoods now limit trick-or-treating hours very early, usually only from 6 to 8 p.m. People tend to go out earlier in the day to ensure their children's safety. In your opinion, was Halloween more fun back then than it is now? Yes or no? Comment your answer and see who agrees with you. Pillowcase candy bags. Forget the plastic pumpkin bags or commercial candy buckets, because in the 60s and 70s, the pillowcase was the most popular and beloved vessel for collecting candy. Pillowcases were favored because they were practical, durable, and available in every household. These worn white pillowcases could hold an impressive amount of candy, triple the size of small paper bags. In some suburbs, children often competed to see who brought home the heaviest pillowcase, dragging them along the sidewalk, creating a distinct rustling sound as they moved down the street. The pillowcase was considered the Cadillac of candy containers before colorful plastic buckets arrived. Children would return home, struggling to carry a pillowcase so stuffed with candy it was almost bursting. However, following the 1974 candy safety campaign and fears of poisoning, reflective plastic bags and sealed plastic buckets were introduced as replacements because they were considered safer and easier to identify at night. Nevertheless, the traditional pillowcase still symbolizes the freedom of American children and the unlimited adventures of Halloween night. If you ever went trick-or-treating with a paper bag or wore a hard plastic mask, hit hype right below the video to let us know you still remember what real Halloween used to be like. Mischief night. October 30th was often reserved for traditional mischief pranks right before the official Halloween festival. This tradition originated in the 19th century, popular in some northeastern U.S. states like Michigan, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. There, children engaged in gentle vandalism like hiding pumpkins or using toilet paper to string it up across trees and houses. This was considered the traditional Halloween Eve, a time where youthful rebellion met the holiday spirit. The thrill and excitement of participating in a chaotic but subtly community-accepted act of mischief created a night of innocent abandon for the youth. Mischief night was a coming-of-age ritual where every prank was part of a shared community memory. Until property damage became more serious and police stepped up control, stricter urban order regulations were implemented. The rise of surveillance cameras and parents monitoring their children more closely also contributed to the gradual disappearance of this tradition. Egging and shaving cream pranks. During Mischief night, everyday items like shaving cream and eggs were transformed into weapons for teenage pranksters. Teenagers often smashed eggs onto friends' roofs, sprayed shaving cream onto cars, and then ran away in the dark, waiting for the trophy the next morning. Sometimes they also used toilet paper and cheap, readily available soap. The next morning, roofs or cars were covered in white cream foam. The smell of rotten eggs permeated the street, looking quite embarrassing. The appeal of this game lay in the thrill of rebellion, fun, but was generally viewed as harmless in the context of the 1960s to 70s. However, later, many cities enacted laws addressing public property vandalism, coupled with increased control over property and household liability, gradually banning this mischievous game. Now, those pranks have completely disappeared and become street legends, with no opportunity to be recreated in the rhythm of modern urban life. Unwrapped homemade treats. Before the 1970s, receiving loose candy, nuts, or homemade cookies wrapped in wax paper was a common and heartwarming Halloween tradition. Opening the thin candy wrapper, hearing the crackle of the wax paper, and tasting the sweet, warm gift from the giver. These handmade treats were considered the most meaningful gifts because they were made with the affection and effort of the person giving them. Many families enjoyed making their own fudge, caramel, or taffy to hand out to children then. They offered a delicious homemade flavor that industrial candy could not replicate. The ingredients for each piece of candy cost about 1 cent back then. In 1965, a candy bar cost 5 to 10 cents, equivalent to about 50 cents to $1.10 today. Sadly, when the razor blade scare rumor and the candy safety campaign spread in the 1970s, immediately, unwrapped candy was strictly banned due to suspicion of being poisoned or containing sharp objects, and parents began to thoroughly inspect every piece of candy. This rumor changed Halloween forever. Sealed, packaged candy dominated the market because safety and hygiene became the top priorities. The memory of those homemade treats is a regret for a time when trust between people was greater than fear. Apple bobbing. If you were born and raised in the 1960s, 1970s, you definitely know the tradition of apple bobbing at Halloween parties. This ancient game originated in England and Ireland in the mid-19th century and was once associated with fortune-telling about romance. The way to play was simple, requiring just a large basin of water with fresh apples floating around on the surface. Apples were very cheap back then, only a few pennies. Participants would try to catch the apples with their mouths, with their hands firmly placed behind their backs, leaning down to bite the apple. Water splashed everywhere and roaring laughter filled the yard. The feeling of getting your head soaked in cold water and the excitement of finally successfully stealing the water apple. After 1980, concerns about public hygiene, the risk of spreading bacteria, and strict school sanitation standards caused this game to gradually disappear from group activities. Although it seems silly, anyone who played apple bobbing will remember the chilly, eerie sensation of searching for that apple underwater. Homemade caramel apples and popcorn balls. Imagine your family's sweet-smelling kitchen in those old October days when Mom stirred a bubbling pot of caramel and Dad stuck sticks into apples, preparing for Halloween. These treats were often carefully wrapped in wax paper or parchment paper, placed in baskets or small boxes, carrying the sweet and warm flavor of autumn. The feeling of biting into a caramel-coated apple, the sticky sweetness blending with the crispness of a fresh apple, is a memory unique to Halloween. Before industrial candy took over, many families used to make these sweets themselves to hand out to trick-or-treaters or friends attending parties. A bag of ingredients only cost about 50 cents then, enough to make 10 meaningful apples. Homemade caramel apples and popcorn balls reflected the traditional agricultural harvest festival aspect of Halloween. Regrettably, this warm tradition disappeared after the rumors of razor blades hidden in apples spread across newspapers and TV in the 1970s. Parents began to fear homemade food from strangers, and the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, advised only handing out sealed candy. Full-sized candy bars. If you were lucky enough to go trick-or-treating in the 50s and 60s, you'll remember the feeling of absolute euphoria when knocking on a door and receiving a full-sized chocolate bar, such as a Snickers or Milky Way. This was the most valuable loot, a symbol of generosity in the old Halloween community. And children carried it all night like a treasure. Your pillowcase would get much heavier thanks to these large treats. Back then, a traditional candy bar cost about 10 cents, only about $1.50 to $2, depending on the location. However, rising candy costs, along with the introduction of the fun size jar mini standard around 1968, caused handing out full-sized candy bars to gradually disappear from Halloween nights. The trend of strictly controlling the sugar content in small candies also contributed to changing this tradition. Each large candy bar handed out was once a source of pride for children, a memory of adult generosity that has now been replaced by smaller packaged candies. Homemade haunted houses in abandoned buildings. In the 1960s to 70s, the scariest haunted houses weren't in shopping malls, but in actual abandoned buildings, attics, or warehouses in the neighborhood. To create the atmosphere, people only needed very simple props: black cloth, candles, flickering flashlights, smoke, and howling sounds played from old cassette speakers. This was the most genuine horror experience that no modern amusement park can recreate. The feeling of stepping across the creaky wooden floors of a real abandoned house with the musty smell spreading through the weird space created a clear, genuine fear and suspense. These scariest haunted houses often relied on creativity, local legends, and were organized by teenagers or community groups to raise money for charity. However, due to fire safety regulations, residential insurance, legal liability, and stricter monitoring by police, local authorities have caused this type of haunted house organization in abandoned structures to be almost completely banned. Blindfolded touch and guess game. Back then, in the dark room of a Halloween party, you were blindfolded and your trembling hand reached into a mysterious box, trying to guess what grotesque object you were touching. This party game was popular in the 70s, relying entirely on touch rather than sight. Strange, cheap items were carefully prepared. A handful of wet noodles felt like ghost guts. Peeled grapes were described as devil eyes, and mushy tofu as brains. These games stirred the children's primal fears, generating screams of surprise, followed by nonstop laughter upon discovering the truth. It was more engaging than any ghost story told. Unfortunately, this simple game gradually disappeared due to hygiene concerns, the risk of food allergies, and strict regulations limiting contact with unsealed food. Nevertheless, the memory of the chaos and laughter remains very vivid for those who participated in this mystery box game. Spooky goop. It could be said that spooky goop was a bizarre combination of a science lab and a Halloween makeup table. Launched in 1967, this costume kit allowed children to mix their own spooky concoctions with names like bubbling lizard lips, toad toes, or bat bones, and then apply them to their faces to transform into monsters. The price was only about $3, equivalent to $28 today, cheap enough for parents to indulge their children during the holiday. The product came in a box with test tubes, small plastic coffins, skulls, and mini shovels, looking exactly like Frankenstein's tools. However, with the tightening of children's cosmetic safety regulations in the early 70s, Spooky Goop was quickly pulled from the market. Today, only a few complete boxed sets appear at auctions, fetching up to $250 to $400 USD, becoming an icon of an experimental and creative Halloween era. Halloween in schools. Halloween in schools during the 60s and 70s was one of the most anticipated events of the year, where the whole classroom turned into a colorful and musical party. Traditionally, elementary schools would host a Halloween class party with orange frosted cupcakes, high C juice, and fragrant paper wrap popcorn. Students would participate in costume contests around the schoolyard set to popular music like Monster Mash. The best moment was when students were allowed to wear costumes to school, usually simple homemade outfits or Ben Cooper sets. Decorations made of colored paper, cut out black cats, bats, and pumpkins made the classroom look even more vibrant. However, Due to changes in educational policies, religious and multicultural regulations, and food safety concerns, many schools eliminated this festival. Instead, they switched to hosting a generic fall festival with themes that didn't emphasize ghosts or religion, causing those bright class parties to fade into memory. School costume contests. School costume contests were an important school tradition that encouraged creativity and allowed students to express themselves, spending weeks preparing their outfits. Students would search through their parents' closets, use household items and simple materials to create the most unique costumes. The excitement of walking into school in a homemade costume, standing on the stage to show it off in front of the class, was one of the most unforgettable joys of the year. The cost of the outfits was minimal, sometimes zero. Teachers and parents often served as judges, evaluating based on creativity, not the expense of the outfit. Sadly, this tradition gradually disappeared as schools became concerned about causing emotional harm, or as store-bought costumes became too common and elaborate, reducing participation in homemade outfits. Whole neighborhood participation in giving out candy. On Halloween night, almost every resident in the suburb turned on their porch light and prepared candy, waiting for children to knock. Halloween was once considered a family-centered event, where families spent hours walking together, and adults always greeted and chatted with the young children. The memorable feeling was being warmly welcomed by neighbors, receiving candy from people you knew, reinforcing the feeling of a safe neighborhood. However, community participation declined because many homes didn't want to participate due to cost, security, or simply not having children come trick-or-treating. This tradition was gradually replaced by the trend of trunk-or-treat, handing out candy from car trunks and parking lots, which is considered easier and safer, leaving many older adults missing the sense of every house participating and conversing like in the old days. Motorized monster maker. If you ever dreamed of creating a monster that came to life with your own hands, the motorized monster maker was that dream in toy form. Launched in the late 60s by Topper Toys, this set allowed children to pour soft plastic into molds, bake them in the included mini plastic oven, and then assemble the pieces to create monsters that could walk. Back then, the basic set cost about $7.99, equivalent to nearly $80 today, a significant amount for American parents. Any child who owned it became the neighborhood's miniature Frankenstein. But that joy didn't last. These toys were criticized for the potential risk of burns, and the plastic oven was deemed unsafe for children. Therefore, the motorized monster maker gradually disappeared by the mid-70s. Today, a complete boxed set can be sold on eBay for prices ranging from $500 to over $1,000, almost a relic of classic Halloween. Do you still have your old motorized monster maker set? If so, comment one and tell us what kind of monster you used to create with that toy. Drive-in movie theaters. In the 60s to 70s, drive-in movie theaters often held horror marathons, continuously showing classic horror films all Halloween night. Families would drive up, bringing blankets and popcorn, sitting in their cars or on folding chairs to watch old horror movies like Dracula, Frankenstein, or The Blob, Under the Night Sky. Admission tickets were very cheap, sometimes just $1 back then. The feeling of hearing the night wind whistle through the car window, the static radio playing the movie audio, and the moonlight shining on the large screen created a romantic horror experience that the modern generation cannot have. However, this form of entertainment declined starting in the 1980s due to competition from TV, VHS, DVD, and streaming. The cost of maintaining the theater open all night was also high, and changing projection technology caused drive-ins to decline, forcing many theaters to close. Ragamuffin Parade. Do you remember the 50s and 60s when children in ragged, simple costumes walked through the streets, asking for candy or money, parading with innocent smiles? Ragamuffin costumes were typically ragged, simple outfits, very different from the pop culture characters of later Halloweens. As Halloween became commercialized, focusing on trick-or-treating and more elaborate costumes, the connection to Thanksgiving and the Ragamuffin Parade was gradually forgotten. The Ragamuffin Parade was a tradition dating back to the 1800s in New York, initially not strictly linked to Halloween, but often taking place around Thanksgiving or the autumn season. In the 1950s to 60s, many towns still organized the Ragamuffin Parade as an occasion for children to show off costumes and participate in the community. Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, once held its largest Ragamuffin Parade in 1972 with about 6,000 children participating. Later, traffic safety and event management requirements also made street parades harder to organize, leaving the memory of the Ragamuffin Parade lingering like an old painting. Creepy Crawlers Game. Before there was slime or squishy toys, the 60s generation was immersed in creepy crawlers, a famous toy set by Mattel. Children would pour plastic goop solution into molds shaped like spiders, bats, cockroaches, and then put them into the mini electric oven. After a few minutes, countless slimy creatures emerged from the molds, a joy that was both horrifying and fascinating. In 1964, the set cost $6.95, equivalent to $70 today. Every Halloween season, the smell of hot plastic mixed with the scent of roasted pumpkin used to be the smell of childhood. But also because of the oven, numerous small children suffered minor burns, leading the product to be banned and discontinued in the early 70s. Although Mattel briefly revived this toy line in 1992 with a safer version, the original creepy crawlers are now only in memory and in the display cabinets of vintage collectors. Monster Mash song and radio ghost stories.
He did the Monster Mash.
In the 60s, radio was an essential part of the festival, and Bobby Boris Pickett's Monster Mash became the unofficial theme song for October. Released in 1962, the song topped the Billboard Hot 100 and was played repeatedly on the radio, making the whole family sing along in the dimly lit living room. Local radio stations also featured ghost story programs and special shows throughout the night of October 31st, creating a spooky and suspenseful atmosphere. The feeling of waiting for a spooky tune or a horror story in the quiet of the night, where the whole community listened to one thing together, is something modern streaming cannot replace. As television, cassettes, CDs, and later streaming appeared, radio storytelling declined, losing its central role in the family. Although Monster Mash is still listened to, it is no longer the background music for every family Halloween gathering as it was before, when everyone had to depend on shared broadcast schedules. Mighty Men and Monster Maker. Before there was Photoshop or character creation games, children in the late 70s had Mighty Men and Monster Maker. Tommy's toy set allowed you to mix heads, bodies, and legs of dozens of monster templates, place paper over them, and rub with a pencil to print out your own creatures. Advertisements promised millions of combinations, although in reality, there were only about 1,728 variations. The original retail price was about $5.95, equivalent to $25 to $30 today. This set became a creative laboratory for countless children during the Halloween season, where they mixed superheroes and ghouls into bizarre creations. But when video game consoles and ready-made plastic toys flooded the market in the early 80s, this hand-drawing game quickly faded into obscurity. Now, anyone who wants to own it again must pay $150 to $200 for an original set, proof of an era where creativity came from pencils and imagination, not electronic screens. The annual TV special, It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown. Before streaming, watching special holiday television programs was a national event, and It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown was the iconic show for Halloween in the 60s to 70s. First broadcast in 1966 on CBS, it became an annual Halloween tradition. Families had to plan, eat dinner early, and mark their calendars to watch, as it was only shown once a year. Children glued their eyes to the screen, waiting for the CBS logo to appear, quietly watching Linus waiting expectantly for the Great Pumpkin in the pumpkin patch. The eager anticipation for 30 minutes of a special show each year was once the small miracle of October, an opportunity for families to gather and share a common cultural moment. However, This tradition changed when it shifted to streaming, losing the sense of watching simultaneously together and the excitement of waiting for a fixed time. Although the show still exists, the way of viewing has changed, causing the charming anticipation of the past to be lost. The post-trick or treating, candy sorting and trading ritual. The most important ritual after returning home was dumping all the loot onto the living room floor, beginning the process of sorting, checking, and negotiating candy. Children would sit cross-legged, counting candy, and classifying premium candies like Snickers or Reese's bars into the keep pile, while disliked types, like Bit-O honey or wax candies, were usually handed straight to parents. Parents often enforced an annual candy tax, demanding a small portion of the haul, mainly for inspection and then enjoyment. The negotiation over trading candy, like exchanging 5 gummy bears for 1 small chocolate bar, was a small economic lesson of childhood. Although this ritual still exists, the serious negotiations and the feeling of the floor littered with abundant loot have changed due to the prevalence of mini-sized candies and parents' anxieties about checking the candy. Thank you for traveling back in time with us to the 1960s and 1970s, where Halloween was still simple, genuine, and full of warmth. If you love this journey down memory lane, don't forget to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next videos from No Longer Here. And if you want to continue immersing yourself in memory, don't miss the next video. 25 normal things from the 1970s that would shock you today. You'll be surprised by the things that used to be so normal, but are now unbelievable.